We know that our community is a matriarchy. We know that marriage is not something that is sought out in our community or sought after in our community. We know that Black women are less likely to be married, and Black men. We know that marriage is not something that is seen as honorable in our community, right? We understand that. We understand why. We understand that Black women have bought into feminism. We also understand that the government had a lot to do with breaking up Black families. We also understand that a lot of times there are churches who are not, Black churches specifically, who are not talking about the importance of family, and they're talking more so about race and everything else.
For millions of Black women, many blessed with brains and beauty, finding the right man is proving elusive. But why?
Why do we have such low marital rates? And I'm not talking about Black women marrying Black men. I'm talking about men of all race wanting or desiring to marry a Black woman.
Single, Black, and female. Well, research shows more and more young women of color are having trouble finding that special someone to marry.
Why is it that Black women appear to be undesirable when it comes to marriage?
All over, conversations are being had about why Black women are not getting married. According to research, Black American women are the least likely race of women in America to be married. This is a phenomenon. This is a problem. Marriage presents so many benefits, and Black women, we are losing out. Why aren't Black women getting married? I think I've come up with the answer, and I put it all together in my digital ebook. Marriage is for Black women too. In this ebook, you will learn why I believe Black women are not married, the benefits of marriage for Black women, what God says about marriage, and ultimately what we can do as Black women to not only get married, but to stay married. At the end of the book, I have discussion questions for you, your girlfriends, your small group, your church can look at and review so you can reflect on everything that you read. I believe that you're going to get a lot out of this book and maybe some answers that you did not know about why the Black woman's marriage rate is so low. For Black women out there that want to be married, have hope. It can happen. Get the ebook to see how you can get married and improve your chances. Please click the link in the description box to get your copy today. One of the ways of God is in marriage. And how can we do this? How can we be successful? We have to be married. We have to be married. I believe that most Black women are supposed to be married. You may say, because, the world is saying, I don't need a man. I don't need to be married. I can be single. What about being single? The family is the bedrock of American society, of any society. Any thriving society has families. They have intact marriages and communities. But marriage is so key and so important. It is so key and it's so important. And Black women, you're not meant to be alone. Jesus said to be fruitful and multiply. And the sad part about it is so many Black people subscribe to religion. So many Black women specifically subscribe to Protestant Christianity. But yet we're not seeing the fruit of that. We're seeing Black women being empowered. We're seeing Black women starting businesses and nonprofits and growing up and climbing the corporate ladder, or maybe getting education, working. We see all of that. But that doesn't necessarily, that to me isn't really the value of the Bible. The value of following Christ is, first of all, our salvation, being saved, but also the fruit of the Spirit, which allows us to thrive by creating families and stable homes and marriages. And though we may have lots of Black women who are Christians, it's too many of us that's single. And yes, God has called some people to singleness, but he has not called a majority of people to singleness. Not a majority. I'm going to tell you, out of the entire world, if they had a Christian worldview, it would be like a very small percentage of people, maybe 10%, maybe even less, to be called to singleness. Because how can you be fruitful and multiply and bring more communities and more generations and more generations and more generations in doing it God's way if you're not married, if you're not having sex and procreating? See, if you're called to singleness and a life full of virginity or celibacy, you're not doing anything. Now, you can be fruitful and multiply in other ways. You can occupy until God comes. But one of the best ways to occupy is to have a family. And Black woman, it doesn't matter what society is telling you. It doesn't matter what feminist lies you're believing and is telling you in your mind, that you don't need a man. You don't need to have a husband. You can make a baby on your own. You have IV treatments and all of this stuff where you can create the family that you want. You don't have to do things God's way, but actually you do. You do need to do things God's way, especially if a majority of Black women are claiming to be Christians. Too many of us are believers, but yet we don't show the fruits of Christianity because we have too many girl boss conferences and not enough wife conferences. Too many girl boss conferences and not enough marriages happening. Some of y'all may be attending a church where there's very few married people. And so what I'm saying is, it doesn't matter what you think. You're not called to be single. You are called to be fruitful and multiply. And the best way to be fruitful and to multiply is what God told the Israelites to do when they were in captivity, which is to create families, which is to get married, which is to start businesses, which is to tell the people about Jesus, your generations and generations about God and his faithfulness. And so Black women, we're out of order because there are Black women who are professing to be Christians and they don't even want to be married. They're like, I don't want marriage. I don't need marriage. That's not for me. And I definitely don't believe Black women statistically are not only the least likely to get married, but if they do get married, they're more likely to get married at older ages than anybody else. Can you get married when you're old? Sure. But to be fruitful and to multiply, meaning to have offspring, and God says he wants godly offspring. That's really the points of marriage, outside of the marriage symbolizing Jesus and his bride, the church, is also to raise godly offspring. How are you going to do that if you're not married? You think you're going to do that by being a single mother and having a child when you want to without a husband in the house and continuing on the dysfunction that we have all gotten accustomed to in our community? Or do you think you can be fruitful and multiply by getting married and doing it God's way? Majority of humanity is not meant to be alone when it comes to not being married. That's what I mean. Because you can be in community, you can be in a church, you can be in groups, you can have friends. That's another way you can use that verse of it's not good for man to be alone, right? But when Jesus said that, when God said it's not good for man to be alone, he was talking about Adam needing a helper, which was Eve. In that context, he was saying it's not good for a man to not have a wife and for a wife to not have a husband. So he created the helper, which is Eve, to come alongside him and to be fruitful and to multiply. And that's what we need. It's too many Black women doing everything by themselves. They have no husband to come alongside them. And now we've talked about this countless of times of why that is. We know that our community is a matriarchy. We know that marriage is not something that is sought out in our community or sought after in our community. We know that Black women are less likely to be married, and Black men. We know that marriage is not something that is seen as honorable in our community, right? We understand that. We understand why. We understand that Black women have bought into feminism. We also understand that the government had a lot to do with breaking up Black families. We also understand that a lot of times there are churches who are not, Black churches specifically, who are not talking about the importance of family, and they're talking more so about race and everything else. And if you want more understanding about that finding or what I just said about the Black church, look at my video titled Black Women Are Going to Hell, and you will look at the Pew Research study that interviewed Black Christians all over America and talked about the topics that most churches are talking about. They're not talking about premarital sex. They're not talking about marriage. They're not talking about family. They're talking about race. They're talking about gender. They're talking about politics, mostly on a Sunday. And see, that's not setting Black women up to be married. That's not setting Black women up to be found. That's not as wives. Okay? And so what I'm saying is there's reasons. We understand why Black women are not married. We understand that the devil doesn't want Black women to be married. We understand that before, during segregation, Black families were growing. We understand that they were growing. They were doing pretty good. We were working with what we could have. But yet pre-segregation, after segregation and integration, we may have more money now than we did back then, but our community is toe up. Our family structures toe up. Our mindsets toe up. We have ungodly mindsets. So we understand that there are various reasons why Black women are not getting married. However, that doesn't mean we have to stay that way.